Welcome to a video review and a preview of a upcoming game that'll come to Kickstarter actually very shortly. An upcoming game called Judean Hammer, Guerrilla Warfare During the Maccabean Revolt. This game is put out by a new company, Catastrophe Games, and the designer is Robin David. The game is a two-player card-driven war game that focuses on area control, uses some pretty interesting mechanics, and has a lot of asymmetry baked into the design itself. The game plays fairly quickly within an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. Typically games last anywhere from 3 to 5 turns. The reason for that is the card plays pretty fast. The mechanics are fairly simple. I would classify this as an introductory war game. But the victory conditions are pretty simple. The game will end if the card deck, and you'll notice here's the card deck, it's kind of off to the side. If this card deck, after cards are dealt at the beginning of the round, ever is less than 12 cards, the game will end. That's one way that it ends. Another way that the game ends is if one player, let me move this over, is if one player reaches 12 or more victory points. You can see here on the victory point track. One thing you will notice off the top, remember I mentioned asymmetry. Each side, while they can win the same way by scoring victory points, they play very differently. And you'll notice the Seleucid Greeks start out actually with 1 victory point to start the game, and the Maccabeans start with no victory points. So that's their cubes. So the orange is the Maccabeans, and the purple are the Greeks. So basically what this game is focused on, to give you a little bit of the history, in 167 BC, the king of Seleucid Empire, which is a Greek empire, Antiochus, forced residents of Judea to convert to Hellenism, and it obviously upset people. So at one point, a priest called Maccabeus in the city of Modin, right here, which is in the kind of in the center of the map, kind of the left center of the map, he actually killed a Greek and a Judean who were worshiping an idol. I think they were making sacrifice to that idol, and it sparked a revolt, a revolution. Maccabeus ultimately died in that revolution, and his son Judas carried that on, and it was a rebellion against the Greeks. So the Maccabeans used a lot of guerrilla tactics, hit and run, ambush, tried to cut off supply lines. They obviously weren't as good militarily as the Greeks. So that's kind of the focus of the game, and you'll see how that plays out. I'm going to talk about the mechanics. I'll move the camera back. And sorry about the light. It's early in the morning, and I'm trying to get this shot. Alexander and I played this game a couple of times a few weeks ago. We had some rules problems. The rule book that we had, obviously it's a prototype, had a lot of questions, so we were unable to really, we thought, do a review at that time just because we needed to understand those rules better. Since we've received clarification, I've kind of pushed the tokens around, the pieces and the cards. I played a little bit myself. Alexander and I have discussed it, and we decided that I was going to go ahead and do the review. We haven't been together for a couple of weeks with the new outbreak of COVID here in Indiana, so we're trying to stay away. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and shoot this video review, but this is a very interesting game. I do want to emphasize it's a very simple game. I don't mean that the strategy is simple. The mechanics are very simple. It's not complex, fairly easy to pick up. The rules are fairly well written, although we had some trouble in the rule book because some of the language was mixed around. But one of the good things about the game, and I'll show you here in just one moment, you'll notice on the, and this is not a mounted map board, it's a paper map, which is fine. I put some plexi on top. But I wanted to show you you've got these different boxes actually on the map themselves. I always enjoy this in games because it readily puts the rules right at the player's fingertips so that you can play the game, refer to those rules, and not have to dive back into the rule book. The rule book's not long, it's about 8 pages, but it's nice to have these boxes. This is a box that contains rules on recruit. This is a smaller box that talks about movement, because each of them, the Maccabeans and the Seleucids, recruit differently and they move differently. Over here on this part of the board, you can see the sequence of play. Sequence of play is very simple. Each player is going to draw 4 cards. The starting player at the beginning will always be the Maccabeans. Any round after that, whoever is in the with the least amount of victory points gets to choose who goes first. I feel like going second and therefore having the very last card play is very key in this game. So the couple times we played, I was the Maccabeans, and after the first round, I went second every time. So that's kind of the way that that goes. Then each player with those 4 cards that they are dealt are going to take turns playing those cards. Really quickly, let me show you the cards. The cards are fairly basic. There are 2 different types of cards, meaning there are Greek cards and then there are Maccabean cards. I'll go ahead and just focus on these 2 here. So this is a Maccabean card in my right hand. You can tell with the symbol there, the menorah. And then the Greeks have this upside down anchor symbol. That differentiates the cards. Obviously the purple and the green. In my prototype, the cubes are orange. Maybe they should have been green. I'm not really sure. If you look on the map, the Maccabeans color where you place for setup is green. So I just think maybe they didn't have enough green cubes. They're making prototypes. Small new company. But the cards are fairly simple. I'll talk about those cards really quickly. They have the event name. Here's the card number on the bottom. Which side those cards are affiliated with. Once again, Greek, Maccabean. Up in the upper left corner, there is the op point value. And looking through the deck, the highest is 3 and the lowest is 1. Let me just make sure I'm not over or incorrectly stating that. Yeah, it looks like the highest value card is 3 and the lowest is 1. These op points, when you play these cards, you can play them for 1 or 2 ways. You can take the operations points and spend those on recruiting or moving units, moving them and ending in a battle. Or you can play the card for the written event. So let's look at this one. Once again, a Maccabean card. Move up to 4 units, up to 4 spaces each. That's very key. Normally, Maccabean units only move 3 spaces. So this potentially could be a game-breaking card if you need to move, say, a lot of units around to either control various cities for the scoring round or to attempt to cut off Greek supply lines. So you could potentially move a couple units, attack a Greek-controlled space or city, defeat it, and then cause them to ultimately die from starvation. So there's a look at those events. Then one thing I wanted to point out here on the bottom is the symbol. So there's the Maccabean and the Greek once again, and you'll notice there's a modifier there, +1. Some of them are, I think the highest ones are +2. So here's an example of a +2. These are used, sorry I hit the camera stand, these are used during combat and during ambushes. So during combat, you're going to draw a card off the top of the deck, and then that's going to modify whichever player symbol comes up, their total for their strength in combat. So if I'm attacking, let's say I have 3 Maccabean units versus 1 Greek unit, and we then flip a card, I'll just flip one off the top of the deck. The Maccabeans are going to add 1 to their total. 4 beats 1, therefore the Greeks lose. The Maccabeans are going to win, the Greeks are going to lose. So that's the way combat is decided. Another very interesting mechanic in this game is ambush, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, and I'll actually show you an example of that. When you as the Maccabeans, and only the Maccabeans can do an ambush, when units move past where Maccabean units are, you can call out an ambush. Then what you do, I'm going to take that card off the top that I used. You're going to flip a card, and all you're looking for literally is the symbol. You're not going to care about the number. That will tell you whether or not the ambush is successful. So if I flipped this card up, this is a Greek symbol, that ambush attempt would not succeed. So it fails. So that's the way those card numbers are used on the bottom as modifiers. One of the very interesting elements of the design, and probably my favorite part of the design, that does take a lot of play and familiarity with the system to truly understand, and not understand, but how to understand the finer points of that, is that when you play a card for the event, you're going to discard that card. I'm sorry, not discard it, you're going to take it out of the game. It's not going to go into the discard pile. It's going to be removed from the game and placed in the box. So you can see, powerful event, but I'm going to lose a card in the deck. One, that's my card. Two, that has my combat modifier on it. Therefore, I'm in essence weakening my own deck for combat and ambush purposes by taking these events. When I use the card just for the operations points, they're going to go into the discard pile and they're going to be reshuffled into the deck. The way the game is set up, it's very interesting because we found that the Greek player, more often than not, one, because they start already in the lead. Remember I showed you they already have one victory point to start the game. And two, if you just very quickly review the map, the Greeks, which are the purple cubes, really are set up for victory from the get-go. They're the major power. They were in control. They're set up for victory. These different colored areas are called regions, and they are scoring regions. So you have a yellow region here. Jerusalem is its own region, so whoever controls Jerusalem gets 1 point. This tan region is a different region. Then you have a green region, a blue region, and a purple region. Those are the really 6 regions on the board. These are Greek supply centers and can never be entered by the Maccabean player, and they don't score any victory points, whether they're controlled by the Greeks or not. They are important because that's their supply sources. The Maccabeans have to trace supply to their cities that are controlled. So during the scoring round, which is at the end of, the sequence of play, after the players play all 4 of those cards, you're going to check that supply, and then you're going to score your regions. So you look at those 6 different regions, including Jerusalem. Each one of those is going to be worth a victory point. So as you can see from the board, really the Greeks are set up to get 3 victory points right here in the center from the get-go. Plus, over here, they really have that purple region. So they're set up for 4 victory points. As you can see, though, the Maccabeans are set up really for only 2 victory points from the get-go. The onus is on the Maccabeans to get out, recruit guys in areas, move guys in, and attempt to take over those areas. Control of these regions, and therefore who scores a victory point, is simply decided by who controls the most cities in that region. So for instance, in this area, the Maccabeans hold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cities, and you can see the Greeks hold none. These wilderness areas do not count for control. It doesn't matter how many guys you have in it as long as you control those cities. Up here in this kind of light bluish area, the Maccabeans control it, but they only have 1 city, and you can see that the Greeks, at the top of the map, sorry, let me move that up. The Greeks have a couple of units there and can quickly take over a couple of different cities. So it's really on the Maccabeans to get out, get active. They have the first card play. Typically what I do is try to get a presence up here, moving units in to protect those cities so that I can have at least 2 scoring cities compared to their 4. then you got to work on it. You got to try to take one of these areas away. I have found that this purple area over here is probably the more reasonable of the areas to control immediately. So I try to work on that, or the yellow one. So anyway, then you're going to score those regions at the end of the sequence of play, and you're going to get a victory point for each of those regions that you control. So pretty simple game. Once again, the goal is to get to 12. And as I stated, you can see the Greeks are really set up to score 4 victory points from the get-go unless the Maccabeans do something and get on it and try to whittle them down. Plus, you got to remember, they're behind 1 victory point. So I've kind of gotten ahead of myself. I was talking about those boxes. Let me go back to the boxes, and then we'll talk about those in the different mechanics. So here are these boxes, and it's hard to see. I know I probably need to be down lower. These are combat boxes, and there are 2 different types. You have an ambush combat box, and then you have a battle combat box. So when an ambush, remember I talked about an ambush. Here, I'll show you a really, no, I'm not going to show you an example of ambush now. I'm going to talk about this. You're gonna reveal a card, remember, from that deck to decide who wins that ambush. If it's a Greek, they win. If it's Maccabean, they win. There are always casualty rolls in this game, whether you win or lose that ambush. Here, the Maccabeans are going to roll a die. If they roll a 5 or a 6, they're going to lose a unit in that ambush. The Greeks are more likely to lose a unit in ambush. If they roll a 3 to 6, 2/3 of the die faces, they're going to lose a unit. So that's the ambush. Now, looking at the battle, there's a little bit of a difference. You're going to also reveal the card, as I mentioned. You're going to add the combat symbol modifier to the unit total. The highest total is going to win. Attacker always wins ties. And then you're going to go to the casualty step. The winner of the battle is going to roll a d6, and if they roll a 5 or a 6, they're going to lose a unit. Pretty simple. The loser is always going to lose a unit. Why do I say that? They're going to roll a d6. If they roll a 1 to 4, they will simply lose a unit and nothing else happens. If they roll a 5 or a 6, they will also lose a unit, and then you'll notice and there's a line going back. They have to re-roll. So it's, to me, that's an exploding 5 or 6. And I've seen that happen where a loser might lose 2 or 3 units by having poor rolls in a row, and it'll continue happening. So if they roll a first 5, they'll then roll again. They might roll another 5 or a 6. Then they have to roll again until they don't roll a 5 or a 6. So that's a very important part of the design. It comes down to luck of the die, but I think it does, in my opinion, represent that style of battle they're trying to model here, kind of chaotic. So that's a look at the boxes. We've talked about regions. We've talked about how they score. You'll notice also these lines. These are roads. Units can only move along roads. So if I have units, let me just put a couple units here. If I have units in this wilderness area, I have only 3 movement options, not 4. I can move to the Gazara, Elasa, or Modin, but I cannot move to Emmaus unless I move through Gazara. Or if I move through Elasa and then Kafir Salama, then a wilderness area, then I can get to Emmaus. So you can't just move to adjacent spaces, you have to move along roads. That's partly to model the hilly, desert, arid terrain of this area. You couldn't just go across country. You weren't going to make it. So units have to follow these lines. Those lines become very important because they set up, in essence, choke points. For instance, here, these Greeks start 2 spaces away from Gazara. They have to move through Jamnia. That gives the Maccabeans here an opportunity to ambush them immediately. I would say as the Maccabean player, you are looking for that opportunity to set units up to have an ambush opportunity anytime a Greek unit moves into or through an area. You want to be able to ambush them. It's a free thing. You lose a unit, but you also may ambush them, cause them to lose a unit. And the important thing is if you're successful on an ambush, that stops the moving force. So the roads are important. I already mentioned these Greek supply cities. Those are important. That's how they trace their supply, and then obviously the regions. So that's kind of a look at the map and how it's set up. I've already talked about some of the elements of play, but I want to cover some examples of battle because there are some very key decisions that players have to make about how they play the game. So let's cover the operations. Let's start with recruit. Recruit is a little bit complex only because you have to remember where you can and cannot recruit. So the bonus is, remember I talked about it, and you can see that on the left part of the screen, there's this box for recruit so you can know exactly where you're trying to recruit. But with recruiting, I'm going to play a card, so I'm going to pick a card and I'm going to play it. Here, let me grab a card. All right. So I'm going to play this 3-value card. I'm the Maccabeans. I'm going first. I'm going to actually go ahead and recruit some units. So I'm not going to use the event, although it is a very good event, but that's a nice modifier and I don't want that to be out of the game. So I'm going to go ahead and straight up do 3 op points to try and recruit some units. So let's go over here. Ops value, you can split any way across cities in regions not controlled by Greeks. So that's a key. Controlling of regions and controlling of cities really prevent the way that you can recruit. And it's hard to remember those on the first play or two, but you do have this ready reminder, and it's able to be done. So you always take ops -1. So I have 3 points -1. You don't always, but as the Maccabeans, ops -1, I can recruit that many units. So I'm 3 -1. I can recruit 2 units. Let's grab 2 cubes. 2 units in a single controlled city in a region controlled by Greeks. So let me set up an example of that. Let's say for some reason I had a Maccabean there. I moved there last turn. That is what that is referring to. A single controlled city, I control that city, in a region controlled by Greeks. So I can recruit 2 guys into that city. Pretty simple. Now, if the conditions change, the number of units I can recruit changes. So let's go ahead and take those off. A single wilderness location, anywhere, it doesn't have to be controlled by you. It can be controlled by the Greeks. That does not matter. But it says ops -1 for a single wilderness location. So with 3 -1, I'm gonna put 2 units in a single wilderness location. So I'm gonna put a couple units here in this purple area because I want to have opportunity to ambush these guys coming out of Philadelphia. I also want to put pressure on this area and hopefully cut the supply line here in Madaba as he moves down and takes these cities. I also want to try to control those cities so that I can score victory points. So that's the way you recruit. I can't recruit units generally in areas controlled by Greeks. You can't do it. But there are ways to do it in a city in a region controlled by Greeks. You just pay a -1 penalty. Or you can do it in a single wilderness location. A little harder to recruit guys in the wilderness. You have a -1. So the Seleucids, the Greeks, so same thing. They're going to play this 2 card to recruit. They can split any of these op points. So you're going to have 2 op points. They can split any number of these across different areas. So they're going to get 2 guys. They can recruit into controlled cities. So they have to control them. So I could recruit a guy here in Kafur Salama. I could also recruit a guy here into Madaba. So that's possible. Let's take those 2 away. You also, areas adjacent to controlled cities in controlled regions, but they must be able to trace a supply line. So areas adjacent to controlled cities in controlled regions. So a good example of that is this tan region. areas adjacent to controlled cities. So let's use Masfa as an example. Bethel is adjacent. I could recruit units into there, 2 units. If I chose Michmas, I could recruit in Apharima, Jericho, or the wilderness here. So I might put 2 in Apharima. I might put a couple in Jericho because I want to move over to Jazer, try to cut off their supply, etc. So that's the way recruiting works. Pretty simple, not complex, but you got to remember these. And I can't tell you how many times when Alexander and I played, we'd be like, oh, I can't recruit there, or oh yeah, I can recruit there. You know, it was kind of a hit or miss, but once you play this game 2 or 3 times, I think you're going to remember that stuff very well. All right, so movement. Let's say I play this event, and I'm the Maccabean player. I play this event for movement. I get 2 ops points. It's listed there. Ops value always gets +1 when you're when you're moving. So this would turn into a 3 movement, which means I can move 3 units. And then remember, the range is different. I can't remember if I talked about that specifically, but Maccabeans can move 3 areas, while Greek units can only move 2 areas, and the Maccabeans can always ambush those Greeks as they attempt to move. So the movement is a little bit different. It creates the number of ops the same. This would be 3 for both Maccabeans and the Greeks, but Maccabeans can move range 3 while Greeks only get range 2. So with movement, you're picking not the spaces you can move, the number of units. So I play this card as a Maccabean. I can move 3 units, a total range of 3 spaces each. So let's just say I'm going to start trying to spread out. I would want to leave that for ambush. I want to move a 2nd unit there. I want to move a unit here to get some ambush opportunities. That's 2 units. And let's say Gazara. I want to control this city and stop, the Greeks. Actually, I want to go down here because it sets up a nice ambush opportunity as the Greeks try to move into my region. So that's it. I just moved 3 units, 3 spaces. Movement pretty simple. So that's the way. Now, one other point I want to cover, and I didn't talk about this when I talked about the card play. If I am the Maccabean player, I cannot take this event, but when I use this card of my 4-card hand to recruit or move, this event goes off for the Greeks. So you can see when I play this for ops, this event's going to go off, and they can take the event or they can decide not to take the event. As the Greeks, I found that they're going to take the event 95% of the time, particularly when this one is just a +1 modifier on combat. This says recruit 3 units into a single location in a controlled region. So the Greeks say, oh, okay, I'm going to go ahead and just take 3 units into a single location in a controlled region. So they could go ahead and recruit 3 units in Bethel because they control this area. Then when they took that event, this would be discarded from the game and would thin the deck out. Once again, that's going to lead to the game ending more quickly. And Alexander and I found, and this is some of the things that we talked about when we played it, trying to better understand the game, the design, the decisions made in the design, and then the strategies. We feel like the Greeks, with the lead and with the powerful position that they have from the get-go, they're going to want to try to end the game as quickly as possible. They most likely will take every event that is played by the Maccabean player on one of those events, unless it's a two cost modifier. But even then, I feel like they would take it because, once again, that thins that deck. They also, more often than not, are going to take the events in their hand over the operations points, because sometimes the events are just ridiculously good. A lot of times the events say move a certain amount of units and then initiate combat. Or it might say recruit a couple of units, move them 3 spaces, and initiate combat. There's just really good events, And we looked at the events, and we feel like the events are a little bit better for the Greeks. So that was one thing I know I want to ask the designer a little bit, because I feel like in this game, the Greeks have all the cards. They have it set up for them to win. They have all the cards in their hand, and that probably represents the historical outcome better than not. With that lead and with the position they're set up, I feel like the Greeks are going to win more often than not. I think if the Maccabeans are going to win, it's going to be because of skillful movement and taking opportunities to cut supply lines when available. I feel like that's very, very important. All right, so I'm going to show you an example of combat. Let me go ahead and show you an example of combat real quick. Let me stack my deck to give the result that I'm trying to show. Because remember, during combat, you're going to draw a card. So let's go over here. I'm going to set up a situation. And let's assume this is the final card play of the round. So this is the final card play of the round. Actually, I'm going to remove one of those because I feel like the Maccabeans would have ambushed and they probably would have won there. So let's say, I'm going to go ahead and let me grab those cards and all right. So I've got that all set up to show the example that I want. As the Maccabeans, I'm going to go ahead and play this card for 3 ops to move, right? I'm not necessarily going to need all of them, but I'm gonna do it. So I'm just gonna move for one of those ops. I'm gonna move 1 unit there. That's going to initiate a battle. Anytime 2 units of opposite sides are in the same area, that's going to initiate a battle. But I do all my movements first in order to figure out where all your battles are going to happen, where they're actually going to happen. So I have 3 movement points. I moved 1 here. I'm going to attack there at Madaba. You may be asking yourself, well, Grant, why aren't you taking both units to improve your chances of combat? Well, normally I would do that, but in this instance, I'm trying to take a risk because I want to cut their supply lines. So I'm using the resources I had, and I'm trying to do what I feel is best. Up here, I'm going to move a couple other units. I'm actually going to move into these cities and take control of those. Remember, each unit can move up to 3 spaces for the Maccabeans. I'm going to go ahead and just take over those cities so that I have a good control of that region. I'm going to score that region, which is good. All right, so now that we've done all the movements, we're going to do a combat round. So we count up the unit strength. The Maccabeans have 1 to 1 Greek unit. So it's tied 1-1. Remember, attackers always win the tie, right? Attacker wins ties. So at this point, if I pull a card that doesn't have a modifier, I know there are no cards in there that have no modifiers. The Maccabeans are set up to win this combat, which is good. So remember, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the top card off the deck. We're going to flip it over. Only thing we're going to look at is the modifier. Okay, hey, luckily, and I knew that because I set it up this way, because I want to show you the supply line concept. This is a +2 modifier for the Maccabeans, so therefore 1 + 2 is 3 compared to a 1 in the Greek side. I win the battle. The Maccabeans are going to win the battle. Let me bring my handy dandy dice tower over. Remember, each side's going to roll a die to see whether they lose units or not. So I'm going to go ahead, and the red is the Maccabeans, the blue is the Greek. We're going to roll those, and we're going to test your knowledge to see what happens. So the Maccabean player, which is red, rolled a 2. Remember, on the winner of a battle, if they roll a 5 or a 6, they lose a unit. So thankfully, the Maccabeans do not lose a unit. Actually, let me go ahead and I'm going to do this just because it's more fun. I'm going to show you. So I changed that a little bit. I still won the battle. Oh, look, the Greeks rolled a 5. That's awesome because that's going to cause them to lose 1 unit. So we're going to throw that off in the casualties. And remember, refer to that battle casualty chart up here. If the loser rolls a 5 to a 6, they're going to lose a unit and they have to re-roll. Hey, there's one more unit there. I got to roll a 5 or a 6 or they're not going to lose that unit, which may end up ruining my example, but I'll then do it to show you. Hey, look, oh, I rolled a 6. Well, that was amazing how that happened. I rolled a 3, but for my example, I wanted to roll a 6. So they lose another unit. They have one more unit. They're going to lose 2 units. So that was a nice battle. And the Maccabeans are going to win that battle. Therefore, they will be able to stay in control and control that city. Now, the result of a battle, let's say it had ended like this. So the Maccabeans won the battle, but the Greeks had 1 unit left, so there are units from both sides. If that's the case, the attacker has to retreat. They still won the battle, which is another element that I'm like, it didn't feel great, but it's the design intent. It was the way that it worked out, because these are cities and hills and it's hard to take them. I would have had to have moved out and I would have won the battle, but therefore I didn't cut their supply lines. So remember, in my fantastical example, I ultimately caused them to lose 2 units because they rolled a 5 on their first casualty roll, and then they rolled a 6 on their second, therefore losing 2 units. So remember, this was the final play of cards of the turn. The Maccabeans went second, therefore they played at the very end. So now we go to that handy-dandy supply check. So we check the rest of the board. Oh, everything else was in supply. I don't care. Don't worry about that. Now we look at this supply situation. The Greeks have to trace supply to Philadelphia, which is up here, or any other Greek supply center on the map. Well, that's not going to happen because I'm cutting off with my control of Madaba by a Maccabean unit. I cut off Philadelphia. They can't get to Philadelphia. I can get to my supply sources as the Maccabeans way up through here to get to all these supply sources over here. Then these other 2 cities, Nabadath and Machaerus, cannot trace supply to any other cities because they have this Maccabean unit hiding out in the wilderness, stopping them from being able to get supplies, food, water, etc., reinforcements. So therefore, their supply lines are cut. So what does that mean? Well, it simply means that in a city that is isolated from a supply city, so these are cities, right? But they are not supply cities or supply centers. So each city that is isolated, no matter if it's Maccabean or Greek, will ultimately lose 1 unit in that city during this supply check. So we're going to lose 1 there. The Greeks are going to lose 2 units, and all of a sudden Machaerus and Nadabath are now open and not controlled. So now we're going to go to the scoring segment of the game and try to score the region. So let's pull ourselves back over so you can get a full view of the map. Remember, there are 6 different scoring regions. The purple, this is light blue, light green, tan, red or pink, which is Jerusalem, and yellow. So let's do the Maccabeans first. They control this region because they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cities with their units, and the Greeks have none. They win that one. We then go to this light blue. The Greeks have 1 city, while the Maccabeans have 3 cities, so 3-1, they win supply there. So hey, Maccabeans have 2 areas, looking good. Then we go over to this purple area. The Maccabeans control 1 city, Madaba, and the Greeks controlled none, so they get that. That's 3 points. This brown one, you can see it's totally controlled by the Greeks. There is no opposition, therefore they control that. They control Jerusalem because they're the only units that occupy Jerusalem. And they control the yellow because they have units in Adullam and Bethabas. So they have 3 units. They will score 3 victory points. 1, 2, 3. So they now have 4 victory points. The Maccabeans have 1, 2, 3 victory points. So 1, 2, 3. They are still behind by 1 victory point, but as you can see, they've made a good inroad here towards winning the game because they literally got rid of 4 Greek units on the east from Philadelphia and control 3 regions handily. Now what they got to start doing is probably picking away at this yellow region, maybe putting a little pressure on this tan region because you don't want these units to be able to move to the east. You really want to tie them up. So that creates some interesting strategies for that next round. You can also see that the Greeks have a lot of units on the board, so they really need to get aggressive next turn and move those units out to create some combat opportunities. So that's a look at combat. We looked at movement. We did not look at ambush. Let's really quickly look at an ambush. Ambush is a pretty important and pretty neat concept. I really like it. So let's say the Greeks decide that they want to move into Alasa. So they play a card with 2 ops values. They can move 3 units up to 2 spaces. So they're actually going to take all 3 of their units from Jerusalem. They're going to move here, that's 1, and they're going to move into Alasa. Well, there is an opportunity there for the Maccabeans to ambush them and cause them to stop moving so that they cannot get into the city at this point. So very important. So an ambush. I call out an ambush. I'm going to ambush these 3 units with my single unit in the wilderness. That's it. We don't roll any die. I just call it out and we go back to the cards. So I'm going to bring those cards over here. We pull off the top the card, and what are we looking at? Oh, we're looking at the out point. No, we're not. We're looking at the symbol. No, we don't care, the symbol up here. We do care about this symbol, and all we care about this symbol is that this is a Maccabean card. We don't even look at the modifier for an ambush. We're looking simply for the Maccabean symbol. Now, you may ask, well, aren't all the Maccabean cards, don't they all have their own symbols? Well, the answer is no. And remember, this is a prototype. This is a Maccabean card, although it's a different color. And I think they did that for playtesting purposes so that players would remember that this card's slightly different. This card is a Maccabean card, which has a bad Maccabean event. Remove 2 Maccabee units. It's actually a penalty, but it has a Seleucid Greek symbol on it. So if this is pulled during an ambush, the Greeks are going to win, not the Maccabees. So that's an interesting twist. There are a couple of those, and you've got to play those well. The reason, sorry, we're diverging, but that's the way I do these things. The reason the Maccabee may want to take this terrible event is to simply get it out of the deck. That's a 2 modifier. That's a good card for the Greeks in combat and ambush. You don't want that in there. So you may decide, I can afford to lose 2 Maccabee units. I'm going to play that, waste the turn to get that card thrown out of the deck. It's a strategy thing. If you can do that during the first round, that's a very valuable play. If this card comes up, say in the 3rd, 4th round, maybe the 5th round, you probably don't care and you're not going to take that event. You're going to take the op points. So there's some of that interesting decision baked into these cards, and I think the designer did a hell of a job doing that. It's frustrating, but it is interesting. So anyway, back to the ambush. Once again, Maccabees ambushing some Greeks on the move into Alasa. They're trying to take that over. Whoa, I hit the... Sorry, I'm using a different stand because I wanted to get a closer up view. So I pull this card. Boom. It is a Maccabee card. And they're the same number of cards for each side in this deck. But as I said, it's going to be thinned out as the Greek player takes more of their events. And you're going to get more success on not only combats, but ambushes. So really, That's part of the strategy for the Maccabees. Just stay in the game, stay in the game, stay in the game, stay just close enough. By the end, you're going to have opportunities to play those cards, do ambushes, and get things done where you can potentially take over 2 or 3 regions and outscore the Greek player maybe in turn 3, 4, and 5 and win the game. Kind of steal the game. Anyway, so back to the ambush. We pulled the Maccabee card. We don't look at the modifier. The Maccabees are going to win this ambush. Let's get my dice tower. And each player is still going to roll a die to see. So the Maccabees are going to win this ambush. They cannot move any further. They're going to control that city, unfortunately. But that's okay. It stops the movement, and ultimately, in the end, is going to help. So red is Maccabee, blue is Greek. All right. So, well, crap. All right, so the Maccabees rolled a 4. Remember the ambush chart. The Maccabees are not going to lose a unit. And the Greeks only rolled a 2. They have to roll a 3 to 6 to lose a unit. So nothing happens there. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Nothing changes. So they're going to take that. Had I won the ambush, all right, I did win the ambush, they would then have lost a card. Or not a card, a unit. Which would make that easier to take over in the future. So that's why that's important. So that was an example of ambush. So we've went over combat, ambush, supply line check, movement, control of regions, the importance of supply centers for the Greeks. I think we've covered all the mechanical elements of the game. So now we're down to that point where I'm going to give you my opinion and my thoughts. Upon the first play of this game, I thought, well, this is kind of broken. I thought there's no way the Greeks are ever going to lose. And in fact, we had a rule messed up in the rule book. It actually was incorrectly written. The game ended at the end of the second turn, and we're like, that can't be right. So we emailed the designer. He corrected that, and we figured that out. That the game, at least, I think the earliest it can end is maybe the end of the 3rd round. More often than not, the designer said about 80% of the time the game comes down to the 4th and 5th round and someone wins by victory points. But initially, with those wrong rules, I thought, there ain't no way the Maccabees are ever going to win this. The odds are just stacked against them. But upon the second play, and then as I've played it myself, trying to learn the different strategies here at home, I've realized, you know what? It's really 50-50. If rolls go a certain way, the Maccabeans can definitely win the game. Particularly if the Greek player is taking a lot of events early and gaining a decent lead, but then at the end, man, you're pulling those cards for ambush and combat and winning every single one of those as the Maccabean player. That is very, very key. So I really believe this game is fairly well balanced. The game is simple. It plays in about an hour. Even if you don't know the rules, 90 minutes is the longest this game's going to take, and that's going to be because someone has analysis paralysis. I think 40 to 45 minutes is what this game is going to take. You're only playing 8 cards around. The mechanics are pretty simple. It goes fairly quickly, and the game's going to last 3 to 5 rounds. That's it. So 10 minutes per round, 30 to 45 minutes is about what these games are going to take. So, do I like the game? Absolutely, I enjoy the game. I think there's a lot of very interesting mechanics. I love the card play. Card-driven games that force upon you the events for your enemy when you play their aligned cards, to me, are the bomb. I don't like a card-driven game that doesn't do that. We've played many different types of each, and we really prefer the ones where the enemy events go off if you play them for your ops, because it creates a secondary level of tension, some difficulty that you have to think about, plan for, and deal with. I call it making lemonade out of lemons or garbage out of garbage. You know, you get a crap hand, you've got to make sure you figure out how to mitigate the damage and make it hurt you the least, knowing that ultimately you're going to get a better hand in the next draw and you'll have the opposite experience with your opponent struggling. Really like that. The very cool events, and let me show you those. Let me grab those. At first, I really did not like the negative Maccabee events that hurt them, because I'm like, why would I ever take those? Well, the answer is you would really only take those in the first round or two, because you surely will not do this round 5 just to get rid of a modifier, because guess what? You have that card in your hand. Here are the two, and they're the orange ones that have the big modifier for the Greeks on combat and ambush, have good op values of 2 each, but look at those events. They suck for the Maccabees. Remove 2 Maccabee units. Why in the world would I ever want to remove 2 Maccabee units? Well, the only reason is to get this card out of the deck. That is a horrible event. Now, that one is bad, but let me show you this one, because it's even worse. You will remove all Maccabee units that are adjacent to Greek cities. So let's just look at that. If I played this under this current setup, what is a Greek city determined as? A Greek city is a supply center. That's a Greek city. Also, Greek cities are ones that are controlled by Greek units. So look, there's one, there's one, there's one, etc. So if this card gets played, let's see how many. I'm going to lose 1, 2, 3. I'm going to lose 4, 5, 6, because those are all adjacent to a Greek city. Not going to lose that. I'm going to lose that one, both adjacent to Greek cities. I just lost my entire army. So I'm going to tell you, if that ever comes up, that card ever comes up, you've really got to think about whether or not you want to play that one. And more often than not, I found this one sits in the deck because that's just too devastating. But I do like these 2 cards. I think the inclusion of them is pretty good. I would argue that the Greeks needed at least one of these types of cards in their deck. I felt like that was something that I think could have been modified to make that game a bit more competitive. But as I've played it a little bit more, I do realize it's more 50-50. But it just sucks that for the Maccabee player, you got to deal with those. But once again, it creates a level of fun that's interesting. I think the cards are very well done. The cards are always a struggle of, do I just take it for the op so I can keep the cards in my deck? Or do I take it for the event, knowing I'm going to lose that card, but that event is really good? You know, this one for the Greek player, recruit 4 units into Greek cities. That means any Greek cities. There is no limit on how those can be divided up. You may move those 4 units. So you not only recruit, but you're also able to move. So it literally, this one card is like 2 cards in and of itself. The Greeks will almost 99% of the time take this event. But look, it's going to remove a 2 modifier for their combat. They will have to do this knowing that that's going to ultimately affect their deck later down the line. But I love that. The events are really good. I think the situation is very interesting. It creates a very interesting dilemma for both players. Do I be aggressive as the Maccabees trying to take over regions? Well, absolutely, but not at the cost of jeopardizing the security of your couple of regions that you gain control of really to start. You don't have the ability to lose these 2 regions and then somehow come back down the line. It would be very challenging. And as the Greeks, you have to ask yourself, do I risk moving my units out with some of these ambushes, because that can be very dangerous, and do I continually set myself up for those ambushes? And I think the question is very hard. It's a very hard question to ask yourself, because let's just look at these Greek units. The moment they move there, they set themselves up for ambush. Boom. The Maccabees win that ambush. They might lose a unit. And then guess what? They're stopped movement. They can't move again. Well, a cagey Maccabean player might go ahead and secrete into the wilderness because, oh, look, they still control this region fairly securely. and set up another opportunity where this guy's got to move in and I can ambush him from both these sites. They may lose another unit. Then they gain that city and it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to move my units in and I'm going to create a battle royale and I'm going to destroy that Greek unit pretty much no matter what. And then all of a sudden the Greeks have lost 3 units. 3 units are pretty important. Not something that you can give up willy-nilly. So you got to make those tough decisions. But you also got to make some tough decisions as this Maccabee player, because you've got to break up one of these 2 units or one of these 2 areas. You've got to get in there. If you looked at my example on this side, I did a hell of a job getting this purple region, but that doesn't mean it's secure because they can recruit more units here. So you got to be wise, you got to be careful, you got to set yourself up, but you just don't have the units to necessarily do that. Lots of tough choices, lots of interesting dilemmas. The mechanics are also very, very cool. The combat and ambush, very neat. I love the exploding 5 and 6. I think the modifiers being drawn from the top, which in essence make this diceless combat except for the losses. I also think the asymmetry and the different ways that each side recruit and move is cool. There's a couple concerns I have. The game is very fast playing. And the game, I don't know that the situation changes that much that it's going to be a game you're going to play 500 times. So when you invest in this game, I guess what I would like to say to the designer and the company, it would be nice to have some alternative setups or some alternative mechanics added that add in some new cards. The card deck, I believe, is made up of 28 cards, 14 of each side, or maybe it's 30 cards, 15 of each side. I'd like to throw in an extra 5 or 6 cards on each side and make it random, meaning you shuffle all the cards together and then you might draw off 5 cards off the top. And you don't know, you may be removing all Greek cards or all Maccabean cards, or maybe you do that on the different factions before you mix them together, just so it creates a different set of cards each turn. I think that would be cool. So yeah, playability's good, mechanics good, rulebook's fairly simple. I think the production value is cool. I enjoy the use of cubes. I think they're nice. I'm not sure what their final colors will be. I think it will be green for the Maccabees and purple for the Greeks, but I'm not sure. I think the card art is very well done. These are very nice drawings. I don't know if they're historical or if someone has put those together, but I really do enjoy those. I think the card text is pretty cool. I do like the map. Ilya Kudryashov put this together. We interviewed him. He's a war game designer that does a lot of work for like Hollandspiel, High Flying Dice Games. So he's a good artist. I think there's a lot to like about this game. My one concern is always going to be replayability and longevity. But I think from the designer's perspective, maybe they throw in a Kickstarter what do you call those, stretch goals, where you throw in some more cards and you can change it up, or you have an alternative scenario set up, or maybe there's a couple different things that you can that they can provide. So anyway, I like this game. Coming to Kickstarter, I think this one would be a nice one to add to your collection. I do enjoy these small box games. So this prototype, I think, was put together by Blue Panther. It is very reminiscent of Hollandspiel games, as well as White Dog games. I like these boxes. They're thin, they're simple, they fit on my shelf well, art's good, layout's nice, material's good and thick. I think this game is a winner. I think you're going to like it, and I think that you should consider backing it. So I wanted to thank Tim Densham with Catastrophe Games for providing us this prototype. I also want to thank David Robin for the design and for his help. I think this one's going to be nice. We are working on a written review or written interview that I will post on the blog probably around the Kickstarter, and then we'll post this video shortly prior to the Kickstarter and then promote that as it kicks off. here shortly. So thanks for watching. I've been Grant for the Player's Aid, and once again, this is Judean Hammer, Guerrilla Warfare During the Maccabean Revolt from Catastrophe Games. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it.